I really kind of hit this moment where I started kind of having this out of body experience of like, I love this and I love this. And my thoughts and feelings are no longer matching up to everything I grew up with. My foundation is literally crumbling underneath me.
Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. Crises aren't necessarily a bad thing in and of themselves. Although they're really unpleasant, they can lead to forcing us to grow up and better define ourselves and where we stand with things. They can serve as catalysts that anchor our moral compass internally within ourselves rather than external, like outside of us. And this process can lead to more freedom and greater agency and a fuller life. I've talked to many people who have gone through a faith crisis to some degree as they work to develop their sexuality. I'm personally one of them. And today you'll get to hear from my guest, Jacqueline Guernsey, a bright and talented woman as she shares her story. Jacqueline is a certified life coach turned romance novel author. Sounds like a great combination. She has a degree in psychology and a master's degree in English. She shares an incredible story about her growth journey over the last 15 months, and I'm so grateful that she is brave to come on the podcast and be really vulnerable and share it with everyone. She shares about how sexual challenges in her marriage led to faith challenges, and how she's grown in the midst of all that to reconcile the two. And I hope you find this story super inspiring. If you haven't heard, we've announced a fun and exciting virtual marriage retreat. This is different from the in-person retreats we do. This retreat focuses more on sex, technique, pleasure, passion, and deep connection during sex. It's a kind of retreat where you and your spouse will want to get a hotel room or send the kids to grandma's for the weekend and join us live via Zoom webinar. And it's coming up on June 9th and 10th, which happens to fall on International Lovemaking Day this year. What a coincidence. Anyway, if you want to join us, I totally recommend you sign up right away. You can sign up at getyourmarriageon.com, click on retreat and choose virtual retreat and plan for a romantic and exciting weekend with you and your lover. Jacqueline, welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I am so honored to have you on as a guest today. How are you?
I am doing good. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. You are super talented and creative, and you have an amazing story, and I look forward to hearing more of it today. But real quick, I gotta know, how did you and your husband meet?
Well, through a whole lot of God's hand, like for real. I wish I had time to go into every single detail of everything that happened, but eventually, through God's grace, we ended up together at this park. It was kind of like a group of friends. His friends and one of his friends I knew from college had invited me. I thought it was a date. It was not a date, apparently. So
Were you let down?
I was a little let down, but I was perturbed. I'm like, really, guy? Like, you couldn't just tell me, like, do you want to come hang out with my friends? You're asking me one-on-one. I'm thinking it's a date. Like, it was, and the kid, like, didn't talk to me the entire night.
It's a miserable date.
Right. But my now husband was also there. And he, cozied up to me and we talked for most of the night and had a good time. And later I found out, I can't remember how, maybe his mom had told me this, but when he got home that night, he walked in and his mom was like, oh, so like, how was it? Did you have a good time? And he turned to her and was like, I met the girl I'm going to marry.
Whoa.
And I went home and I was like, I'm never going to see him again.
As in you weren't interested, or that was all fine and good, but you have no plans to see him again?
But I was just like, I was still, I think, riding the wave of like, I can't believe this guy asked me on a date and then never talked to me again. And like, well, at least I got to talk to this nice guy, but like, when am I going to see him again? Like, so it was just, we still joke about that. It's still a good time because it's a lot of a personality right there. It's like, he was very gung-ho. He knew what he wanted and he went for it. And I was just like, yeah, whatever. I don't like. I guess we'll see.
And you dated like a long while before you're married, if I recall correctly.
Yes. Yep. We dated for about a year and a half, and then he left to serve a mission for our church for
Uh-huh.
years, and then we got married like 3 months after he got home.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool, cool. And you have 4 children, and you're a life coach, and you're also an author of a great book called Song of Thieves, if you wanna, get it. I'm reading it. I think it's fun. It's a great book.
Yep. I love it. It's quite the change from life coaching to then wake up one day and decide I'm gonna write a book, but
Mhm.
I loved reading and I decided literally just woke up and was like, "I'm gonna write a book," and I did, and it's great. It's a lot of
But
work.
there's a story behind that story, which is what I wanna get into today. So
Yes.
can you tell me what happened in your life, like, 15 months ago?
Yes. So I've been a
And
life coach for, let's see, we're in 2023, so 3-ish years, and I had this moment where I was like, I think I should probably get into more of the relationship side of coaching.
to pick a niche, right? That's the
Yes.
thought, right?
Yes.
And how long you been married at this point too, to kinda give it a timeline?
12 years,
Okay. Mhm.
about 12 years at the time we had been married. And I was in a business mastermind and I was talking to the group, like, I really feel like maybe I should go into relationship coaching. That seems to be what a lot of people come to me for. And like, that's kind of the content that seems to do really well. But I'm really nervous because I feel like one of my strengths is like empathy, being able to like kind of walk in the client's shoe because I've been there and I've done it. And so I feel like it's easier for me to kind of take their hand and guide them along. But I was worried because I'm like, I have a great marriage. Like, I really don't feel like I have a lot to contribute in the empathy department. Like, obviously, there's things that are like annoying or like little arguments that you have. But overall, I always felt incredibly blessed thinking that my marriage was really great. And it was like, it really was. But like 3 days after this conversation, I'm like feeling really good, right?
Gung ho. We're
Gung
gonna
ho.
help with relationships because I have a great relationship, right? Uh-huh.
Well, that's gonna be my strength, helping my clients along is like, I know what I'm doing.
Yes. Uh-huh.
You know
Uh-huh.
what I mean? Um, and like 3 days later, my husband, in the most genuine plea, was like, "Hey, I'm really struggling."
Mm. And what was he struggling about?
He We really struggled sexually, like, from day 1, I think.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and luckily, now we've talked about it a lot since then, but, it was a struggle for us to really get on the same page sexually, and for me, it didn't feel like quite as big of a deal, and I really didn't understand how big of a deal it was to him until he really came to me.
Mhm.
He was like, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this." So, it was at first, I was kind of like deer in the headlights, like, I don't know what's happening, like, I'm confused, but, like, also I'm like, I know that this is what you want. It wasn't like I was stupid, like,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
time, like, brand new information,
Uh-huh.
like, I knew that this was something that he wanted to get closer intimately, like, physical intimacy.
Mhm. But it was different. Something about this particular conversation was different.
Yes, yes, it was, I think just seeing the emotional plea of, like,
Mhm.
this is really important to me, really struck me, and at first, I was like, "Alright, we're doing this, like, we are going to find whatever we need to do to, like, make this work." And so for the first probably 2 months or so,
Mhm.
was a very, like, partnership experience where we kind
Uh-huh.
of together were trying to, like, figure things out. But I think as time went on, like, my brain was just not prepared for all the changes that it was like, and this again, I think the story that I kept telling myself was, "This is on me.
Ah.
This is
Uh-huh.
a problem. This is something I need to fix." Even though he was doing stuff and was very open and, like, talking to me about all the things he was learning, and he even admitted, "I really thought that this was kind of, like, on you, but I'm realizing how much of this is also on me that I was not aware of before." And even
Mhm.
having all those conversations, I feel like mentally, emotionally, physically, I kind of just shut down because
Mhm.
there was so much at one time. And, I kind of went into a really decent depression from that.
Oh
Um,
my. This
where
is
I
after the 2 months, then you find yourself kind of
Yeah. Yeah, and
uh
I didn't understand it at the time, like, what was going on. I knew that it was something around this because I'm like, I didn't even wanna be, like, touched, and so that's kind of the catalyst. I'm like, I've gotta luckily luckily, I was the life coach
uh-huh. You have tools. Uh-huh.
tools, and I
Uh-huh.
could recognize in myself, like, "Hey, this probably isn't normal." And so I like, what is something that I can do for myself to kind of look forward to life again in general? Because there were some really low points, like,
Mhm.
it was just really questioning everything in my life. And I was like, I just need something to help me get out of bed every day. And so
Mhm.
that's where the novel came from. It was like this bucket list dream that I had had.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm like, I'm going to write a book. And that's kind of where I didn't devote like tons and tons of my time, but it was kind of my escape from I was overwhelmed with all the sexual stuff. I was overwhelmed with the depression and I was drowning. And it
Mhm.
was kind of that little glimmer of escape that I could go to forget everything that was going wrong in my life. And
And step into fantasy a little bit and be
yeah,
okay.
yeah, to just escape, which I did as a kid. That was my escape was like reading. And so
Yeah. Uh-huh.
that was my comfort. That was my comfort.
And during this dark time, there's this quote that you shared with me once that really impressed you. J
Yes. This is the quote, which I'm actually as I'm continuing to write, there is a second novel in the works. So this is a lot of what I'm going to be focusing some of my characters and storyline around is when it's dark, look for stars.
When it's dark, look for stars.
Yeah.
'Cause
Well, at the time, I know it seems very superficial, but it was
Mhm.
the star. Like at that moment, I just needed something to kind of look forward to and to kind of keep me above ground
Mhm.
and taking a breath. And so that's yeah.
Let's go back. So, what were some of the struggles you had sexually? If can you share some of those? Why was this such a big deal in your relationship? What was your husband wanting, expecting? Why was it hard for you to kinda shift and to move into that? Which, got you more depressed, I guess, but
Yeah.
can we talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. Honestly, the majority of it came around to like our desire levels were different.
Mhm.
And I think my understanding of sex was very different. I wouldn't say it was like super different than his, but I just like culturally, religiously, a man and a woman, I think, in a religious culture grow up in very different worlds. Like, you still see it, like, you can see sort of the other person's, experiences in a way, but they're
Mhm.
at the same time so different from yours, and I think that was as we kind of started moving into this, like, well, why don't I want to have sex as much? Like, I actually think that like, I remember as a kid being excited.
Uh-huh.
I
Tell me
remember
a time, that moment you remember, like, being excited.
know that there was a single moment. Like, I just remember several moments over time as,
Mhm.
like, I would say probably this is kind of young. I don't know if this is scary, but I would say probably between 12 and 14. I
Mhm.
remember being, like, starting to get very aware of my body, my presence in the world. That's kind of when I started figuring out, like, what sex was.
Uh-huh.
Well, and I remember just thinking, "I bet this is gonna feel really good." Like, I
Yes.
it's gonna
Uh-huh.
be a really great experience.
Uh-huh.
And I remember just I can't again, I can't remember a single time. I just remember the feeling of being excited.
Mhm.
And then over time, it completely smashed.
It
Like,
got beaten out of you.
was beaten out of me completely.
Give me an example of, like, something you absorbed from the culture, family, whatever, that where it beat it out of you.
Um, this is also a very interesting idea because again, I can't remember one single moment.
Uh-huh.
I just remember over like this general feeling and idea of, again, culturally, like my parents never talked about sex ever. Like it was a
Mhm.
very taboo topic. Religiously, I just remember, once a year you get that chastity lesson and it's shrouded in shame and it's
Uh-huh.
in fear.
Uh-huh.
I don't ever remember anyone telling me like, this is horrible. Don't ever do this. It was like these little undercurrents of, we don't do that. We don't talk
Hmm.
about it. This is not like you're way too young to understand this, but do not participate. Um, basically, you're going to hell if this happens before you get married.
Hmm.
It was very shameful. That's
Hmm.
that's the overarching feeling I remember is just the shame around sex. And I had loads of questions, like
Hmm.
loads of questions. Um, I remember one time reading a book. I had no idea what an open door romance novel was.
Okay.
And I
Uh-huh.
remember reading one and being like, what is happening? Like, what is this? Is like not what I was like thinking in my head that sex is going to be. It was very traumatizing, but I had no one to talk to about it.
I see. Uh-huh.
I knew if I told my parents, I would get in trouble. Number one, my book
Uh-huh.
would fly off the handle.
What are
Right?
you reading? Or whatever. Uh-huh.
Where did you get this book?
Uh-huh.
Um, and I didn't feel comfortable asking any of my leaders, or I wasn't super close with like even my friends, like
Uh-huh.
even good friends of mine. I'm like, we should talk about this. So I just remember being really traumatized for a while. Like, that's how sex works. Like, I am not ready for this. Like, that's where the fear, I think, really started. Like, I was really excited at a younger age. And then I think just through the lessons and the learning through, and I don't think this was overtly taught. And that's why I'm struggling to find a single moment where I
Uh-huh.
feel
To kind of pin something down. Uh-huh.
like it really was just these like little hidden layers over and over and over and over and over, just really drilled into your mind
Mhm.
of this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. Until literally I got to the point where I'm like, I feel sick to my stomach even thinking of doing this. Where not, 10 years before or so, I'm like,
As a teen, young
oh,
teen. Right. Uh-huh. Any
yeah.
advice you got like the night before your wedding or like leading up to your wedding?
My mom told
Uh-huh.
me if I don't want to get pregnant to get on birth control.
Okay.
That was the extent of the conversation.
All right.
And then I think maybe like the weekend before, she may have said, "Do you have any questions?"
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, "Mom, novels beat you to it like a decade ago. So I'm good." That's not like it was even then I was so uncomfortable,
Mhm.
even just trying to bring it up with my mom. And, that's one of the things as we were, fast forward again to now my husband and I are trying to like work on this together.
Mhm.
That was where I think a lot of my depression also came from was like trying to pinpoint where exactly did my wires start to get mixed up here.
Mhm.
Well, almost all of it was pinpointed back to things I was taught
At
religious.
church. Yeah. And then so now you have this cognitive dissonance. You have a husband you love and a church you love.
Yes.
Like and you feel like you can't hold on to both.
Right.
So tell me what happened next? Or tell me more about like the religious side of things and
Yes.
how the struggles there.
I really kind of hit this moment, and I was thinking about this also, trying to like pinpoint some moments where I started kind of having this like out of body experience of like, I love this and I love this. And my like thoughts and feelings are no longer matching up to everything I grew up with. Like my foundation is literally crumbling underneath me.
Mhm.
And oddly enough, I was actually in a session with a client because after all of this, I started sharing all the things that I was learning about men and women and sex and desire. I started shifting my niche to more of a sexual desire coach.
Mhm.
Um, and I was actually talking to a client about this. He was actually a higher desire partner
Mhm.
who was trying to figure out how to help himself and help his wife to have a better sexual relationship. And he was telling me this story. We happened to be a member of the same religion. Um, and he told me this story about how him and his wife enjoyed oral sex. Like that
Mhm.
was something that was very pleasurable for her.
Uh-huh.
And he was like, we had this marriage class that we went to at church. It was like kind of like an institute, but for married couples.
Uh-huh.
Um, and really focusing on marriage topics. And he's like, I remember still to this day, and he was an older gentleman, I want to say maybe 60.
Uh-huh.
He's like, I remember to this day, they were newly married at the time, so it had been a while. And he's like, the leader, like the teacher of this got up, and they kind of separated them out, men and women,
Uh-huh.
to different classes, which was kind of odd. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, strange.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Um, so the teacher got up there and was basically like, if you are engaging in oral sex, like you are not a worthy member of this religion.
Ah.
And he told me this story and it really blew my mind. Like, and it started bringing up a lot of other stuff. Like, I remember hearing about oral sex as well. And it was Satan.
Uh-huh.
I don't even remember, again, I don't remember a single person ever telling me you are not to have oral sex or anything like that. But
Uh-huh.
the overall general feeling I grew up with was you do not engage in this. And so he's telling me all of this. And I had learned a lot about, things that were pleasurable for women. Like this is kind of what I'm coaching on and what I'm working on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And telling me this. And I kind of like, I just felt my religious foundation completely fall apart.
Right. Because, like, wait a minute. I've been reading how oral sex is very effective for pleasure for women. And
Yes.
then if my religion teaches that's wrong,
Right. I think
like,
that was the
mhm.
first moment I really started like questioning the trust I had in the leadership
Mm-hmm.
and the things that we were being taught.
Right.
Just because like one of the things that we are taught is like if the leadership say it's coming from God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the moment that I really started to question everything that they had taught me.
Yes.
Is this really from God? Because this wasn't from God. Because it not that long after
Uh-huh.
gentleman had this class, I want to say maybe it was the 90s,
Uh-huh.
mid 90s,
It
was
was the 80s when that was
okay.
taught, but yes.
And
Uh-huh.
they redacted and were basically like, if
Yep.
you guys are comfortable with it, whatever you're comfortable with within your marriage, go ahead
Mm-hmm.
with that. Because so many people were like, hey guys, like this is the only way my wife can orgasm.
Uh-huh. Yes.
So now what? Like you're basically telling us that we can't engage in this way and she can't experience pleasure in this way because now we're no longer like worthy in the eyes of God. Um so that was like really that foundation just fell apart in that
Mm-hmm.
moment. It's like
Uh-huh.
I remember in the session this was I need to leave. Like take a break. I need to tell him I need to go to the bathroom or something because I was so taken back
And
by
overwhelmed by all this, right?
yeah. And so I think that was kind of I don't know that I had a faith crisis more than I had a trust
Mm-hmm.
crisis. My trust was completely wiped away. And then
Mm-hmm.
I had to spend the next year or so kind of rebuilding like one by one, like block by block. What do I
Mm-hmm.
feel like is God? And
Mm-hmm.
what do I feel like was maybe their own bias and fear and maybe insecurities that were coming across as doctrine, but
Mm-hmm.
really just a cultural fear. If that makes sense.
Makes sense. So what were your anchors that you held on to during that time then?
I think for many,
Uh-huh.
I can tell you that it was very, shrouded in darkness. It was a very, very dark
Mhm.
time, but my children, I think, were probably one of the only anchors I found because as I'm going through this, like, when you are extremely depressed, you don't wanna have sex,
No. No.
and so
Mhm.
I felt even more ashamed because
Right. Which compounds the problem, right? Uh-huh.
because I think that's what my husband was really,
Mhm.
like, in my head and, your thoughts really get messed up when depression is on board.
Yeah.
Uh, in
Mhm.
my head, I'm like, "He's gonna leave me." Like, he's gonna leave me, and it could not have been further from the truth when I finally broke down, and we're talking, like, months and months and months of, like,
Uh-huh.
thinking, if I don't get myself together, my husband's going to leave me. I even started questioning, like, should I just let him go so he can be happy? Like,
Right. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
because I feel like I was the entire problem.
Mhm.
And then when I finally broke down and was like, "Are you gonna leave me?" He's like, "Why would you ever think that? Like, where is this coming from? This cannot be further from, like, reality." So lots of, like, come to Jesus moments in our marriage where
Uh-huh.
you really kind of have to break down the communication walls
Mhm.
that I had kind of built.
Mhm.
he kind of had as well, because he's like, I don't know what's going on with her. Like, I thought things were really good. And when I'm a withdrawer, so when I am having a problem, I like sink inward.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go outward to like find the help or the things that I need. I kind of just go into my shell, and it's like just put my hoodie on and cover my face and just everyone leave me alone, you know?
Yes. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So um that was very, yeah. I'm trying to like, where do I pick up from?
So your kids are some anchors.
My kids were some anchors, and
Did you find
writing,
any anchors? Oh, writing was an
writing
anchor.
an anchor.
How
Yeah.
about faith-wise? Anything you found as an anchor
Faith
in there?
wise, I at the time, no. At the
Mhm.
time, I really felt like I was just a kite flying free in the air, and there was nothing kind of pulling me back. I even remember having a conversation with my husband at one point. It's like, if I left, would you, like, what would you think? Like, how would
If
you,
you left the marriage, you mean?
if I left the church,
If you left the church, uh-huh.
if
Uh-huh.
I just walked away?
Uh-huh.
I really was struggling. Like, everything was kind of like pinging in my mind, like the modesty stuff. And I'm like, wow, that,
Yes.
and that, like,
Uh-huh.
all of these things
Or
were,
this, it's easy
yeah.
targets, right. Uh-huh.
And my brain is great at finding problems.
It sure is. Uh-huh.
So
And ruminating on them.
that's it, ruminating on them, and I found them all. No, and I really have the most supportive, loving husband in the entire world, because he really just sat there so patiently and just kind of, I remember we were out to dinner and we were there for a very long time as he kind of broke things down and talked to me about it. And it ended up being a really bonding experience, because he was like, hey, guess what? I have questions too. And we had never talked about it.
Huh.
And
Uh-huh.
so he was kind of sharing some of his, like, sometimes I really struggle too, because like this was my experience and these were some of the things I was taught. And I don't believe that was true either.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think that was from God either. So it ended up being a really good experience. So that, I think, gave me like the smallest anchor right there, is like having the support from him. Like, I knew in that moment, like, okay, he's not going to leave me.
Mhm.
He's
Mhm.
he's here and he's going to help. And so that was a little bit further along. Like, when I say there was like dark ages, there was probably like 6 months where I for sure was like, I'm never getting out of this. Like, there's nothing here for me. Um, and then I kind of got to the moment when I was going through like block by block, what do I believe about the religion itself?
Mhm.
That I think in my mind, all the things I was learning in the beginning sexually, I think had some time to percolate and had some time to like grab a hold in small places, to where, as I was kind of unlearning some of these harmful things
Uh-huh.
that I'm carried with me religiously, I think those thoughts and beliefs started to take a little bit stronger hold. And so it started like, sexually, things actually did start, maybe about a year after, which is easy to say. Like, it's a really long time. A year is a long time. So, like, it's to come on a podcast and be like, maybe like a year later, and for the like 30 seconds.
They're like, "A year?"
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it's a long time.
Uh-huh.
So I don't want to glaze over that
We
of
get the
like,
time-lapse version of
yeah,
this.
you get the time lapse version, but that year was very long. And I just started noticing just a few months ago, like, hey, some of these are like really starting to shift in my mind. And so I think of like this questioning time, as much as it was horrible and I would not wish it upon anybody. I think it helped me to unlearn a lot of the hurtful things, because there was no more credit behind them.
Mhm.
Even though I was like, I still do find it difficult to trust
Mhm.
leadership. Um, but one of the other really beautiful things that has come is, I'm like, I believe in Jesus Christ. Like, I don't think that my testimony in Christ has ever been as strong as it has been
That's
right
another
now.
anchor.
It's another anchor. Like,
Uh-huh.
didn't have that
Mhm.
because I was so focused on the religion for the first 34 years of my life,
Mhm.
that I feel like Christ kind of got left in the dust, because I was so focused on hitting all the points of like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm a great rule follower. I'm a great employee. You tell me what to do and it will get done. And so I was really great at hitting all the checkpoints that religion taught me that I should do in order to get to heaven. But it left a little room for Christ because I wasn't
Yeah.
on Christ. I was focused on hitting the check boxes or check
Yes.
boxes. So, um, as I'm like questioning everything, I really had to be like, what is it I believe? Like, what do I believe? Because it feels like garbage to think God is not real, like Christ is not real. Like, I didn't in those moments, I felt very alone, like maybe Christ wasn't there and that was very difficult. But as I started just thinking, um, it was actually I was talking to my sister who left our religion at like 17. She hasn't been back and she's very
Uh-huh.
um black sheep because
Uh-huh.
it's family. But it was in a conversation with her and I was kind of just laying it all out there for her.
Uh-huh.
I'm struggling. I'm literally like, I'm drowning and I don't know what to do. And she was like, she's been through AA. She's struggled with a lot of addiction in her life. And she was like, you have to look for Jesus.
Uh-huh.
Like, you just have to, in anything, like the most mundane stuff, just look for Jesus. And so I started to do that. And I'm like, hey, this feels really good. Like, I
Mhm.
actually like this glimmer of like, this feels really good. And it kind of just catalyst over a few months time period into just like, I am for sure like Jesus Christ is real. And so that I think kept me one foot in the door.
That's good.
And something my husband and I have also bonded over is we've kind of struggled together, kind of religiously. That all kind of catalyst from this beginning of like, hey, let's figure out sex together. let's
Yeah. Uh-huh.
small little like conversation we had kind of blew up into this big
Mhm.
thing that I think, as we're kind of the clouds are parting a little bit, like there's
Mhm.
so much for us to do together. There's still so much for me to kind of unlearn and then relearn sexually for myself
Mhm.
and for my body. But I feel like we've never been in such a good place.
Uh-huh.
So that's exciting.
That's good.
Yeah.
So I love what you're talking about because every person sh- has some moral development or spiritual development, if you want to call it that way. And early on, your moral compass was external to you. It's like, what do the church leaders say? What does my employer say, or whatever, right? That
Parent.
becomes your guiding star at that moment.
Yeah.
And then you hit crisis mode, and then you realize you can't live on borrowed light anymore, so to speak. And then
Absolutely.
this process for you is taking that moral compass from something external and it's now more internal to you.
Yes. Well,
It's a painful process that you went through to arrive there. But with the moral compass now within you, what are some of the strengths and benefits you see in your sex life, in your marriage, or in life in general?
I feel like the world has kind of opened up in a good way because I kind of now, like, this, I think on a superficial level, like you're kind of in charge of your life. But now, like, I actually believe it. I'm like, wow, I really am in charge. Like, I think one of the other really big things that I have come to the conclusion of is feelings aren't necessarily always truthful.
Ah, talk more on that.
Like I like sexually was always very hesitant to like my husband was always way more adventurous than me. And like my body literally would like freeze up. And I'm like, don't do that. Don't do
Uh-huh.
that. It's
Uh-huh.
not okay. I'm not comfortable with this.
Uh-huh.
Um,
'Cause it's wrong or whatever, right? Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah. Like this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel right. So it must.
Would you be willing to share that one thing you told me that you was so hard for you to try is a new position?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
I'm a very pretty vanilla person. Honestly. Because, like, I just really would like, there's one way, and, like, we can't get too carnal, I guess, in my was, like, we can't get too carnal, and so it led to a lot of, like, emotionally, that was my or mentally and emotionally, those beliefs really create these sort of permanent marker pathways in your
Yeah,
mind,
very rigid thinking. Uh-huh.
very rigid thinking, and
Mhm.
it translates into your bodily, uh,
Expression. Uh-huh.
thank you. So, anytime you wanted to try something new, I'm like, "Nope, my body says no." Like, like, literally would clam up, and so, as I've been working with this a little bit and realizing, like, just because I feel uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong. And I think it takes a lot of practice to know the difference between, am I uncomfortable because I don't want to do this? Like, really? Or am I uncomfortable because I'm just new and
Mhm.
you know,
Right.
like
Uh-huh.
it's never done it before. And that newness translates to fear, which really like translates into feeling uncomfortable. So I think it takes some practice. So I'm not saying ignore all the times you feel uncomfortable. That's not what I'm trying to say. But
But discomfort in and of itself isn't a reason not to engage. You gotta
yeah,
because your feelings aren't always the truth.
your feelings aren't
Mhm.
necessarily always the truth.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I think that learning how to be more intuitive with myself and like, is this fear or is this like, no, I don't want to do this? And so being able to play with that a little bit has led us to be able to do a little bit. For me, my husband's always on board.
Uh-huh.
Like, I could come to him with anything and he'd be like,
Yep.
what? You know? Um, but like for the very first time, not maybe even a month ago, we had like kind of as I'm slowly like letting myself kind of move into more of like um allow myself to be a little uncomfortable, but to let myself enjoy it. We for the very first time like had sex like backwards, like
Woo!
behind.
Uh-huh.
Never had done that before ever, and I was like, this was really fun.
Yeah.
I don't know why I was so hesitant. Like, I mean, I know why. I know why. That's not true. I do know why, but, like, you do it for the first time, and I'm like, "Why was I so afraid? Like, why did I think this
What
was"
was the big deal? It was incredible. It was great.
Yeah, what was the big deal? I
Uh-huh.
I don't know, like, how that could be perceived as being wrong because we both enjoyed it. It was fun for both of us. Um, yeah, and so it's exciting when you kind of get and build a little bit of evidence of, like, my body necessarily was hesitant to try it. Like, I could kind of feel myself physically like, "Oh, I'm not quite sure." Um, but I think through this whole process of the last 15 months or so, just being able to, like, respond back to myself and be like, it might, like, mentally, emotionally feel a little bit uncomfortable because it's new and you've never done it, but I'm willing to try. Like, let's just
Mhm.
try it, and if I get to the point where I'm like, "This is a no," then it's a no, and I will just follow through with that, and then maybe try again at another point, and that's totally fine. Like, that's totally acceptable to quit and try at a different time or try again later.
Mhm.
My husband's always on board,
Uh-huh.
so yeah, and it's like, "I will do this as many times as it takes to get it right."
Uh-huh.
But I think it's opened a lot of doors that maybe before I was unwilling because really I felt ashamed. Like
Mhm.
most of the different positions that you try sexually, I just was like, no, this is not what you're supposed to do. This is not what sex is supposed to be. It's supposed to be this like connecting with each other. You've got to look each other in the eyes. Like it is just supposed to be a
Like a sanctimonious.
very,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Um, and I remember I don't know if you want me to use names because I
Go
know
ahead.
obviously, but Sister Nelson had made a comment about how sex should be like the temple.
Mhm.
And I'm like, this is not like the temple. If we do anything, it
Mhm.
was, I think the most adventurous we ever got was like side by side. Like that's
Uh-huh.
it.
Uh-huh.
And like I'm sure even a lot of people listening are like really backwards, like that's what you're excited about. But for me, who's like missionary, like that's the way you do it. It was a big step. Like, it was a really big step, and it was exciting to try something and get done and be like, "We did it," and I don't feel like garbage. I don't feel like God is mad at me. I don't
Mhm.
feel like anyone is disappointed in me. Like, if anything, I felt even more closer with my husband because, like, he was excited, I was excited. I'm like, "We did it." Like, it worked, and it felt good, and was just proud. And so that was a really good feeling and
It's so good.
exciting for the future. Like
Mhm.
you kind of get that evidence behind you of like, hey, guess what? You can feel a little unsure and still go forward and it be really amazing.
Mm.
So I think just like for people listening, especially, is just really learning to understand your body and those sort of sensations that may be telling you, like, we're not doing this. Like, even just desire wise, like for women, I've even had to question, like, is this desire not to have sex true? Or is this just a learned experience that I've created for myself?
Great. Jacqueline, this has been an amazing conversation. So many truth bombs. I love your story and kind of what you've gone through. As we summarize this, are there any like black belt sex tips you can offer someone who's kind of in a similar situation as you were?
I would say be willing to kind of question a little bit your reasons why, like behind maybe not wanting to have sex or maybe struggling with your partner's desire not to, want to have sex is just, I think being willing to kind of question my own discomfort a little bit really led me to some really amazing experiences sexually. Um, and I think I will also add just really being a support system for yourself.
Hmm.
Well, you can't seek the support from others. I do have an extremely supportive husband who's very willing to help support me and whatever. And not just like, I'm not just talking sexually, I'm talking all of the extra stuff that might play into a hesitancy to, move sexually into an experience together. Be really willing to give yourself the support that you need to be able to thrive sexually. Because I think a lot of times the busyness of life or the struggles that we're going through, we don't give ourselves that support. And then our bodies really just shut down. And then we're like, why don't I ever want to have sex? Well, or why does my partner never want to have sex? I think whether you're the low desire or high desire partner, just being willing to give yourself the support you need so that we're not always necessarily having to put that burden on our partner who might also be struggling is very beneficial.
That's really good. Where can people go to find out more about you?
Well, I do have a novel. So anybody who's interested in reading a nice kind of romantic story, which I'm a huge fan of, that also helping sexually is just being able to kind of get yourself out of everyday life.
Uh-huh. This sounds like another black belt sex tip. Let's hear
And
it.
it's another black belt sex tip. It's
Uh-huh.
just kind of getting your mindset back into like you're an individual person. So A Song of Thieves is published and can be purchased. And you can find all of my author stuff on Instagram at author Jacqueline Guernsey. So
Very good.
on Instagram. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in accelerating growth in your marriage, either sexually, emotionally, or spiritually, I want to invite you to work with me in my affordable coaching program called Next Level. More information about Next Level and my fun and sexy apps for couples are available at getyourmarriageon.com. Please also don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And be sure to tell your married friends. I promise, they will thank you for life. Now go get your marriage on.